I spent 30 years believing that sacrificing everything for my son would eventually earn his gratitude, but I never imagined that after my emergency heart surgery, he would stand in my hospital room and call me a financial burden, while his wife scrolled through nursing home brochures on her tablet. What they didn't know was that beneath my modest lifestyle lay a fortune that would have secured their future, a fortune I was about to completely reconsider. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The steady beep of the heart monitor had become my constant companion over the past 3 days. Each electronic pulse confirmed I was still alive, despite the triple bypass surgery that had cracked open my chest and forced me to confront my mortality at 62. The white hospital walls seemed to close in a little more each day, but this afternoon they felt particularly suffocating as I watched my son Michael's expression shift from feigned concern to unmistakable annoyance. "Mom, we need to discuss what happens next," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone, the one he reserved for difficult clients at his law firm, the one that signaled he was about to deliver news the recipient wouldn't like. His wife, Vanessa, stood beside him, her manicured nails tapping rapidly on her tablet screen. The diamond on her finger, the one I'd helped Michael finance by lending, him money he never repaid, caught the fluorescent light with each movement. "Dr. Westfield says you'll need at least 6 weeks of recovery," Michael continued. "Maybe longer, given your age. We don't think you should be alone in that house." I nodded weakly. The pain medication made everything slightly hazy, but not hazy enough to miss the exchange of glances between them. "We've been researching options," Vanessa said, turning her tablet toward me. "Cedar Crest Assisted Living has a temporary rehabilitation program. The reviews are acceptable." Her smile never reached her eyes. "Assisted living?" I managed, my voice rough from the intubation tube they'd removed yesterday. "I just need some help for a few weeks. I thought perhaps—" "We can't have you at our place if that's what you're suggesting," Michael cut in. "We both work. The spare room is my home office now, and frankly, the stairs would be impossible for you." I looked at my son, really looked at him. The boy I'd raised alone after his father abandoned us when Michael was just 4. The child I'd worked 2 jobs for, sacrificing vacations, new clothes, and even essential home repairs to ensure he could attend the prestigious private school that eventually led to his scholarship at Columbia. The young man whose law school application essay had detailed his profound admiration for his mother's selfless dedication. That boy was nowhere in the man who stood before me now, impatiently checking his watch. "The thing is, Mom," he continued, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a compassionate tone, "your health insurance won't cover extended care, and these places aren't cheap. We're concerned about the financial burden this places on everyone." The word burden hung in the air between us. 30 years of sacrifices reduced to a burden. "I understand," I said quietly. "Do you?" Vanessa interjected. "Because Cedar Crest requires a significant deposit, and your Social Security barely covers your current expenses. Michael and I are trying to save for Aiden's college fund." Aiden, my 2-year-old grandson, who I was allowed to see on major holidays and the occasional Sunday lunch when they couldn't find a more appealing social engagement. "I'll figure something out," I assured them, suddenly eager for them to leave. Michael nodded, seemingly relieved to be absolved of responsibility. "Good. We'll let you rest." He leaned down to place a perfunctory kiss on my forehead. "We're meeting clients for dinner tonight, but we'll try to check in tomorrow." After they left, I closed my eyes and allowed myself the release of silent tears. Not for their lack of care. I'd long ago accepted the transactional nature of my relationship with Michael, but for my own naivety, for the decades spent believing that maternal love would eventually awaken reciprocal devotion, for the persistent hope that my son would one day see me as a person worthy of genuine concern rather than an obligation to be managed. A gentle knock, interrupted my thoughts. Elena, the night nurse whose kind efficiency had been my greatest comfort these past days, entered with my evening medication. "Those two are your family?" she asked, checking my vitals with practiced movements. "My son and daughter-in-law," I confirmed, trying to keep my voice neutral. Elena's eyes, warm and perceptive, met mine. They left awfully quickly for people whose mother just had major heart surgery." I found myself smiling despite everything. "They're very busy people." "Aren't we all?" Elena replied, adjusting my pillows. "My mother lives with me and my husband. She watches our kids while we work. The arrangement benefits everyone, but even if it didn't," she shrugged. "Family is family." Not all families, I thought, but didn't say. "You have a visitor waiting," Elena continued. "A gentleman named Robert Winters. He said he's your financial advisor. I told him visitation hours are nearly over. But he seemed quite insistent about seeing you today." "Robert?" I hadn't expected him. Our quarterly meeting wasn't for another month. "I can send him away if you're too tired," Elena offered. "No," I decided. "I'd like to see him." Robert entered moments later, his customary three-piece suit as impeccable as always, though his expression carried uncharacteristic concern. At 70, he moved with the vigor of a much younger man, setting his leather portfolio on the side table and taking the chair next to my bed. "Margaret," he said warmly, clasping my hand in both of his. "I came as soon as I heard. Harrison? At the bank mentioned your emergency when I was reviewing some investments this morning." Unlike my son's perfunctory concern, Robert's felt genuine. In 15 years as my financial advisor, he'd become something more akin to a friend. Perhaps the only person besides me who knew the true extent of my financial situation. "Triple bypass," I confirmed. "Apparently, I've been walking around with severe blockages for years." "And they never detected it in your checkups?" He looked outraged on my behalf. "I may have skipped a few," I admitted. Regular doctor visits had seemed an unnecessary luxury while putting Michael through law school. By the time he'd established his career, the habit of minimizing my own needs had become so ingrained that it never occurred to me to change it. Robert shook his head disapprovingly. "Well, that stops now. You've spent enough time taking care of everyone else." If only it were that simple. "Michael and his wife think I should go to Cedar Crest for rehabilitation," I said, testing how the words felt spoken aloud. Robert's eyebrows shot up. "Cedar Crest? That glorified storage facility for unwanted parents? Absolutely not." He opened his portfolio. "Which brings me to why I'm here. The Baker Street property closed early. The developers were so eager to acquire the lot that they offered an additional 5% to expedite the sale. The property had been my most significant investment, a small commercial building I'd purchased with my modest inheritance from my parents 20 years ago. Located in what had been a declining neighborhood, it had appreciated beyond anyone's expectations when the area underwent aggressive redevelopment. "The funds have been transferred to your primary account as requested," Robert continued, sliding a document toward me. "With this sale, your liquid assets now exceed $4 million, not including your retirement accounts or the value of your home." $4 million. The number should have thrilled me. Instead, it highlighted the painful irony of my situation. My son thought I was a financial burden while I sat on a fortune that could have easily covered the finest medical care available. A key. Fortune I had planned to leave primarily to him. "Does Michael know about any of this?" Robert asked carefully. He had met my son at several holiday dinners over the years and had never seemed particularly impressed. "No," I admitted. "I've always lived modestly. He assumes my teacher's pension and Social Security are my only income. I had retired from 30 years of elementary school teaching just 2 years earlier." "And you never told him about your investments, the properties, the stock portfolio we've built?" I shook my head. I wanted him to make his own way without expecting an inheritance to solve his problems, and I planned to help with Aiden's education when the time came. I paused, the weight of recent events settling heavily on my chest. Though now I'm not so certain. Robert studied me for a moment. Margaret, I've watched you pinch pennies for 15 years while your investments multiplied. You've lived in the same modest house, driven the same car until it practically fell apart, and taken exactly one vacation in all the time I've known you. All while assisting your son financially whenever he asked. His voice softened. It's time you used some of this money for yourself. His words struck something deep within me, a long dormant recognition that I had shaped my entire existence around supporting others, particularly my son, while allowing my own life to narrow, to the point of near invisibility. What would that even look like? I wondered aloud. Robert smiled. That's for you to decide. But might I suggest that it begin with proper post-surgical care in your own home, with professional help? He pulled out another folder. I've taken the liberty of researching some private nursing options. Much better than Cedar Crest, I assure you. For the first time since my diagnosis, I felt a flicker of possibility, not just for physical recovery, but for something more profound, a reclamation of my own life. Thank you, Robert, I said, genuinely grateful. After he left, I found myself staring out the window at the darkening sky, watching distant office lights illuminate as workers prepared to return home to their families. I thought about Michael and Vanessa, probably enjoying an expensive dinner with clients while discussing how inconvenient my health crisis was for their busy lives. I thought about the fortune that had grown quietly in the background of my modest existence, money that represented security, possibility, and choices I had never allowed myself to make. Most importantly, I thought about the revelation that had begun to take shape in my mind, that perhaps the greatest disservice I had done was not to myself, but to my son. By giving endlessly without expectation of reciprocity, I had taught him that relationships were not balanced exchanges, but opportunities for extraction. By hiding my financial success, I had denied him the chance to know me fully, not just as a self-sacrificing mother, but as a woman of capability and achievement. As the hospital quieted for the night, I made a decision. My recovery would involve more than just physical healing. It would be the beginning of a new chapter, one where I finally stepped out of the narrow role I had confined myself to and into a fuller expression of who I could be. What Michael and Vanessa didn't realize, as they scrolled through nursing home options and calculated the inconvenience of my existence, was that this burden they so casually dismissed was about to undergo a transformation that would shake the very foundation of our relationship. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 5 days after my surgery, Dr. Westfield signed my discharge papers. I had expected Michael to pick me up, having texted him the day before with details. As the discharge time approached, I called him twice, each call going straight to voicemail. At 11:30, 30 minutes past my scheduled departure, I received a brief text. In court all day. Vanessa tied up with clients. Can you take a cab? We'll pay you back. I stared at the message, feeling an odd sense of clarity rather than disappointment. This moment, like my surgery itself, was illuminating, revealing with perfect clarity what had previously been obscured by maternal optimism and willful blindness. Everything all right, Margaret? Asked Elena, who had come to say goodbye on her way off shift. I showed her the text. She shook her head, lips tightening. You know I could. No need, I interrupted, reaching for my phone. Not to reply to Michael, but to call Robert. He answered on the second ring. I was just about to call you, he said. I've arranged for a home care service as we discussed. They can start tomorrow morning. Thank you, but I need something else right now. I said. A ride home from the hospital. It seems my son is unavailable. Robert arrived 20 minutes later. Unlike Michael, he didn't complain about the inconvenience or remind me how busy he was. He simply appeared, helped me into his Mercedes, and ensured my prescriptions were filled before taking me home. "I've taken the liberty of having your house cleaned and your refrigerator stocked," he said as we pulled into my driveway. The modest two-bedroom bungalow where I'd raised Michael looked welcoming despite its aging exterior. "And I hired a local service to cut your grass and tend the garden while you recover." "You didn't have to do all that," I protested, though relief washed through me at not having to manage these details myself. "That's where you're wrong, Margaret," Robert said, helping me navigate the front steps. "Friends absolutely have to do these things. That's rather the point of friendship." Inside, I found my home transformed. Fresh flowers brightened the living room. The refrigerator contained prepared meals from an upscale local catering company. Most surprisingly, my bathroom had been outfitted with safety rails and a shower chair, practical additions that preserved both my independence and dignity. "The home care nurse arrives at 9 tomorrow," Robert explained, settling me into my recliner. "Her name is Sophia." "Excellent. References, experience with cardiac patients? She'll be here 4 hours daily for the first 2 weeks, then we'll reassess." "How much is all this costing?" I asked, old habits surfacing despite recent revelations. Robert gave me a pointed look. "Less than 1% of the Baker Street property proceeds. Consider it the first installment of living your own life, Margaret." After he left, promising to check in the next day, I sat in the quiet of my home and truly contemplated what living my own life might entail. For decades, my existence had revolved around Michael, his needs, his achievements, his future. Even after he'd grown into adulthood, established his career, and started his own family, I'd continued to place his priorities above my own. The phone rang, interrupting my reflections. Michael's name flashed on the screen. "Mom, did you get home okay?" He sounded distracted, voices murmuring in the background. "Yes, I managed," I said, deliberately vague. "Good. Listen, Vanessa and I discussed it, and we think you should seriously consider Cedar Crest, at least temporarily. Their rehabilitation program is specifically designed for seniors after major surgery." "I've made other arrangements," I replied calmly. A pause. "What arrangements?" "Mom, you can't be alone right now. You can barely walk up the steps." "I've hired a home care nurse." Another pause, longer this time. "Those services are expensive. How are you planning to pay for that?" For the first time in our adult relationship, I felt no obligation to explain my financial decisions to him. "I have it handled, Michael, but I need to rest now," I said, surprised by how easily the boundary established itself. "The doctor's orders are very specific about limiting stress during early recovery." After we hung up, I noticed my hands weren't shaking as they usually did after asserting myself with my son. Instead, I felt a curious lightness, as if declining to justify myself had released a weight I'd carried so long I'd forgotten it was there. The next morning, Sophia arrived precisely at 9. In her early 50s, with a warm smile and efficient manner, she quickly established herself as both professional and personable. She checked my vital signs, helped me shower, and changed my surgical dressings with practiced ease. "You're healing beautifully," she observed. "But you need to start moving more. Short walks several times a day will prevent complications and speed recovery." She helped me around the house, then assisted me outside for a brief walk to the corner and back. The early autumn air filled my lungs, and despite the discomfort from my healing sternum, I felt more alive than I had in months. "Tomorrow we'll go a little farther," Sophia promised. "Recovery is incremental, small improvements that add up over time." Her words resonated beyond their immediate context. Perhaps transformation followed the same principle. Not a single, dramatic gesture, but accumulating choices that gradually altered one's course. That afternoon, my doorbell rang. Vanessa stood on my porch, designer sunglasses perched on her head, holding a small gift bag. Her surprise visit, unprecedented in our 7-year relationship, immediately raised my suspicions. "Margaret," she greeted me with a practiced smile. "You look remarkably well. We were so worried." I invited her in with the cool politeness I'd once reserved for particularly difficult parents during my teaching conferences. She settled onto my sofa, glancing around with barely disguised assessment. "Michael's so tied up with the Westridge case," she explained, placing the gift bag on my coffee table. "But we wanted to check on you and bring you these." She gestured to the bag. Inside was a bottle of multivitamins and a brochure for Cedar Crest, the same one she'd shown me in the hospital. "Thank you," I said without reaching for either item. "We've been thinking about your situation," Vanessa continued. "This house is really too much for you to manage now. All these stairs, the yard work." I looked pointedly at my ranch-style home with its single 3-inch step at the entrance. "The only stairs are to the basement laundry, which I rarely use." She waved dismissively. "You know what I mean. The maintenance, the cleaning. And now with your heart condition, living alone seems risky." "I appreciate your concern," I replied evenly. "But I'm quite comfortable here." Vanessa leaned forward, dropping her voice to what I supposed she considered a confidential tone. "Margaret, we need to be practical. Your medical bills will be substantial even with Medicare. This house, while modest, represents significant equity that could fund your care." And there it was, the real purpose of her visit. "You think I should sell my home?" I clarified. "It makes financial sense." She nodded enthusiastically. "You could move to Cedar Crest permanently. They have a lovely assisted living section completely separate from the skilled nursing facility. The capital from your house would cover several years' residence." I studied my daughter-in-law with new clarity. Her concern wasn't for my welfare, but for my potential financial impact on their lives. The house, my last remaining asset in their eyes, represented a solution to the problem of my existence. "That's an interesting suggestion," I said neutrally. "I'll consider it." She seemed pleased by my apparent receptiveness. "Wonderful. Michael thought you might be resistant, but I told him you're always sensible about these things." After she left, I sat in my quiet living room contemplating this new development. They wanted my house, the home where I'd raised my son, taught him to ride a bicycle in the driveway, helped him with homework at the kitchen table, celebrated his achievements and comforted his disappointments. The place that held the physical history of our life together. And they wanted it not because they needed the money — Michael's law practice was thriving by all accounts — but because they saw my potential needs as a liability to be managed through the efficient liquidation of assets. Sophia returned from her lunch break to find me sitting with the Cedar Crest brochure in my lap. "Considering a change?" she asked, beginning her afternoon assessment of my vital signs. "My son and his wife are considering one for me," I clarified. She checked my blood pressure, her expression neutral. "And what are you considering for yourself?" The question startled me with its directness. What did I want? After decades of placing Michael's preferences first, the simple inquiry felt almost revolutionary. "I'm not sure yet," I admitted, "but I'm becoming clearer about what I don't want." Sophia nodded approvingly. That's often how it starts. That evening, I called Robert and asked him to come by the following day. "I need to make some changes to my will and financial arrangements," I explained. "And I'd like your advice on something else as well." "Does this have anything to do with your son's wife dropping by?" he asked. At my surprised silence, he explained, "I happened to be driving past on my way to another appointment. Recognized her from your Christmas party last year." "It does," I acknowledged. "They think I should sell my house and move to assisted living." Robert's snort conveyed his opinion clearly. And I suppose they have strong views about how the proceeds should be allocated. The suggestion was presented as concern for my welfare, I said, but the subtext was fairly transparent. And what do you want, Margaret? There was that question again. Twice in one day after years of no one asking, perhaps because I had trained those around me to view my preferences as perpetually flexible, always accommodating to others' needs and desires. I want to stop being invisible, I said finally, to them and maybe to myself as well. The next morning, Robert arrived with his usual leather portfolio and a considerably less usual companion. A stylishly dressed woman in her early 60s with a confident bearing and keen eyes. Margaret, this is Diana Lawrence, he introduced. Us. The real estate consultant I mentioned. I had no recollection of him mentioning any real estate consultant, but I welcomed her into my home nonetheless. Robert asked me to assess your property and discuss some options, Diana explained once we were seated. I specialize in helping mature homeowners make strategic decisions about their real estate assets. I'm not selling my house, I stated firmly. Diana smiled. Good, because that would be the least advantageous move financially, especially in this neighborhood. My confusion must have shown, because Robert interjected, Diana isn't here to help you sell. She's here to explain why you shouldn't, and to outline some alternatives that might address your son's apparent concerns while actually benefiting you. Over the next hour, Diana presented a comprehensive analysis of my property and the surrounding real estate market. My modest home, purchased 30 years ago in what had been a working-class neighborhood, now sat in an area undergoing substantial gentrification. Property values had increased dramatically as younger professionals sought affordable homes within commuting distance of downtown. Your location has significant unrealized potential, Diana explained, showing me comparable recent sales. If you were to make strategic upgrades, modernizing the kitchen and bathrooms, updating systems, improving curb appeal, you could increase the property value by 40–50% conservatively. But I just said I don't want to sell, I reminded her. Not to sell, Diana clarified. To leverage. There are several options that would allow you to extract equity while retaining ownership. A home equity line of credit could fund renovations that substantially increase your property value, creating even more equity. Or you could consider a variety of co-housing arrangements that generate income while providing companionship and assistance. As she outlined possibilities I'd never considered, I began to understand why Robert had brought her. Each option she presented reinforced a fundamental truth I had forgotten. This house was my asset, my investment, my home. Not a problem to be solved by my son and his wife, but a resource to be strategically managed according to my own priorities and needs. Think about what you want your next chapter to look like, Diana suggested as she prepared to leave. Your home can be part of funding that vision rather than something you sacrifice to appease others' concerns. After she left, Robert remained to discuss my financial arrangements. I've brought the documents to make the changes you requested, he said, opening his portfolio. But before we proceed, I want to make sure you're certain about this direction. I am, I confirmed. More certain than I've been about anything in years. 2 weeks into my recovery, I had established a new rhythm to my days. Mornings with Sophia focused on my physical rehabilitation, exercises to rebuild my strength, short walks that gradually increased in distance, and monitoring my healing incisions. Afternoons were often spent in consultation with Robert or Diana, strategizing about my financial future and home improvements. Evenings belonged to me alone, time for reflection, reading, and reconnecting with interests long neglected during my decades of self-sacrifice. Michael had called exactly twice since my discharge. Brief conversations focused primarily on whether I had come to my senses about Cedar Crest. Each time, I deflected with vague reassurances that I was considering all options. His frustration at my non-committal responses was palpable, but no longer affected me as it once would have. The emotional tether that had allowed him to manipulate my decisions through guilt and obligation was fraying with each passing day. On this particular morning, Sophia arrived with her usual punctuality, but an unusual companion. A fit, silver-haired man in his 60s carrying a leather medical bag. "Margaret, this is my husband, Dr. James Chen," she introduced him. "He's a retired cardiologist who still consults occasionally. I mentioned your case to him, and he offered to give you a second opinion. Free of charge," she added when she saw my instinctive hesitation. Dr. Chen's examination was thorough but gentle. He reviewed my surgical reports, listened to my heart, and asked detailed questions about my symptoms before and after surgery. "Your recovery is progressing well," he confirmed when finished. "But I'm concerned that your primary care physician didn't catch these blockages earlier. When was your last comprehensive cardiac workup before the emergency?" I admitted I couldn't remember having one. He frowned. "At your age, with your family history of heart disease, you should have been screened regularly for years." He pulled a prescription pad from his bag. "I'm recommending a different medication regimen than what you were discharged with. The beta blockers they've prescribed are unnecessarily aggressive for your current condition and likely contributing to your fatigue." "Can he do that?" I asked Sophia. "Change my prescription?" "James still has his active license," she explained. "And he specializes in post-surgical cardiac care. Your current doctor can call him with any questions." Dr. Chen wrote out the prescription, then hesitated before handing it to me. "Mrs. Reynolds, may I speak frankly?" I nodded, still somewhat overwhelmed by this unexpected intervention. "Your surgery was necessary, but your recovery and long-term cardiac health depend significantly on lifestyle factors within your control. Diet, exercise, stress management. These aren't secondary considerations but primary treatment components." "I understand," I said, though in truth I'd been so focused on simply healing my surgical wounds that I hadn't thought deeply about the broader implications of my heart condition. "I don't think you do," he said kindly but firmly. "Because if you understood, you wouldn't be allowing your son's demands to create exactly the kind of stress your heart cannot afford right now." I stared at him, startled by his directness. "Sophia has mentioned your family situation," he explained. "And I'm telling you as a cardiologist with 40 years of experience, chronic emotional stress is as dangerous to your heart as smoking. Or high cholesterol, perhaps more so, because it's insidious." His words resonated on a level deeper than medical advice. For decades, I had absorbed the stress of managing Michael's needs and expectations, subordinating my well-being to maintain harmony. Even now, despite my newfound resolve, each interaction with my son triggered an automatic stress response. Racing heart, shallow breathing, tense muscles. "What do you recommend?" I asked quietly. "Boundaries," Dr. Chen said simply. "Clear, consistent boundaries that protect your peace of mind. Not just for your emotional health, but as a literal medical necessity." After he left, Sophia helped me fill the new prescription and then suggested a walk to the small park 3 blocks from my house, the farthest I had ventured since my surgery. As we strolled slowly along tree-lined sidewalks, she elaborated on her husband's advice. "James has seen too many patients sabotage their recovery by trying to maintain unhealthy relationships," she explained. "The body keeps score, Margaret. Every confrontation, every boundary violation, every swallowed objection. Your heart feels it all." "I'm trying to establish boundaries," I protested mildly. "You're being deliberately vague with your son to avoid conflict," she corrected. "That's not a boundary, it's a delay tactic." Her assessment was uncomfortably accurate. Despite my internal resolve, I had yet to directly confront Michael's assumptions about my finances or future. I had changed privately, but continued presenting the same accommodating facade publicly. "What would a real boundary look like?" I asked. "Complete honesty," Sophia replied without hesitation. "About your financial situation, your plans for your home, and your expectations for your relationship moving forward." The very thought sent anxiety coursing through me. "That feels extreme." Sophia smiled sympathetically. "Boundaries always feel extreme to people who aren't used to having them, but they're just truth with consequences attached." We had reached the park, where a group of elderly men played chess at concrete tables while young mothers watched children on the playground. I eased onto a bench, contemplating Sophia's words. Truth with consequences attached. Perhaps that was what I had been avoiding. Not just the confrontation itself, but the potential consequences of standing firmly in my truth. "I'm afraid," I admitted quietly. Not of Michael's anger exactly, but of confirming that without my usefulness, financial or practical, I have no real value to him. Sophia sat beside me. "That's a legitimate fear. But consider this. You already know the answer on some level, don't you? And living in uncertainty, maintaining plausible deniability about the true nature of your relationship, that costs something too." She was right. The emotional energy required to maintain my illusions about Michael's character and our relationship had become its own burden, perhaps heavier than simply facing whatever truth awaited. "What if establishing boundaries means losing him entirely?" I asked, voicing my deepest fear. "Then you lose the illusion, not the reality," she said gently. "You can't lose what you don't actually have." That evening, as I sat contemplating how to implement this new understanding of boundaries, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Michael standing on my porch, his expression impatient. I took a deep breath, centering myself in the knowledge that this was my home, my life, and, as Dr. Chen had emphasized, my health at stake. "Mom," Michael said as I opened the door, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation, "we need to resolve this housing situation. Vanessa has been researching Cedar Crest, and they have a vacancy opening next month in their assisted living wing. We need to give them an answer by Friday." I noticed he carried a folder of documents and wore what I thought of as his closing arguments expression, the same look he had when he was determined to overcome resistance through sheer force of will and carefully prepared points. "Hello, Michael," I said calmly. "Please have a seat. Would you like some tea?" He seemed momentarily thrown by my composure. Usually, his definitive statements about my future elicited either defensive justifications or immediate acquiescence. "No, I don't have time for tea. This is important, Mom. I've run the numbers and selling this house is the only sensible option." I sat in my favorite armchair and regarded my son steadily. "I'm not selling my house, Michael. Nor am I moving to Cedar Crest or any other assisted living facility." His expression shifted from determination to frustration. "Mom, be reasonable. Your medical bills are completely covered," I interrupted, "as are my ongoing care needs and any future expenses." He stared at me, clearly not comprehending the implication. "How? Your insurance has a 20% copay and your savings are minimal. You've always said—" "I've never been forthcoming about my financial situation," I stated simply. "That was my choice, and perhaps my mistake. But the reality is that I am not the burden you and Vanessa seem to believe I am." Michael's expression cycled rapidly through confusion, disbelief, and the beginning edges of calculation. "What are you saying? That you have money? From where?" The question was so characteristic of him, immediately focused on quantifying what might be available rather than questioning why I had kept my finances private, that I almost laughed. Instead, I maintained my calm demeanor. I have investments that have performed exceptionally well over the years. I own multiple properties besides this house. My retirement accounts are substantial. In short, I have more than enough to provide for myself however I choose. He sat heavily on my sofa, the folder sliding from his fingers onto the coffee table. Why wouldn't you tell me this? All these years you've lived so modestly. You drive a 10-year-old car. You buy clothes from department stores. You never take vacations. Because material luxuries weren't my priority, I explained. Investing wisely was. And yes, ensuring your education and opportunities was also a priority, one I chose freely. His eyes narrowed slightly. How much are we talking about? Ballpark figure? Again, the characteristic focus on numbers rather than meaning. The specific amount isn't relevant to this conversation, Michael. What matters is that I am financially independent and intend to remain in my own home with appropriate support. Services. He leaned forward and I recognized the shift in his demeanor, from demanding son to attentive lawyer sensing an opportunity. Mom, if you have substantial assets, we should discuss estate planning, ensuring everything is properly structured for tax purposes and eventual inheritance. My estate planning is thoroughly handled, I assured him. Robert has been managing my investments for 15 years. He's very competent. Robert? Your financial advisor? Michael's tone sharpened. He knows about all this money, but I don't. I'm your son. Yes, you are, I agreed. And Robert is my financial advisor. Those roles entail different rights to information about my affairs. His face flushed with indignation. You can't. He stopped, visibly collecting himself. When he spoke again, his voice had modulated to a more reasonable tone. Mom, I'm just concerned about you. If you have these resources, you should be using them for the best possible care. Cedar Crest may not be necessary, but perhaps a higher-end facility or extensive home renovations to make this place more appropriate for your condition. As I said, I've made arrangements that suit my needs and preferences, I replied evenly. Which brings me to an important point. Going forward, I'll be making my own decisions about my life, my home, and my finances. I welcome your input when I ask for it, but I won't be pressured or manipulated, even with good intentions. Michael stared at me as if I had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. In a way, I supposed I had. Assertiveness and clear boundaries were indeed foreign to our established dynamic. Is this because of what I said in the hospital? He asked, his tone shifting toward injured innocence. About you being a burden? I was stressed and worried. You know I didn't mean it like that. This isn't about any single comment, I clarified. It's about recognizing that our relationship needs to evolve into something healthier for both of us. I've enabled a pattern where my needs are consistently subordinated to yours. That pattern stops now, not just for my sake, but for yours too. He stood abruptly, gathering the now useless Cedar Crest documents. I need to process this. It's a lot to take in. I understand, I said sincerely. Take whatever time you need. I'm not going anywhere. After he left, I sat quietly in my living room, absorbing what had just transpired. For the first time in our adult relationship, I had spoken my truth directly, without cushioning it to protect Michael's feelings or preserve a false harmony. The conversation had been uncomfortable, but beneath that discomfort lay a profound sense of liberation. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. We should talk more about these investments and properties. I can bring a colleague who specializes in estate law. Dinner Friday? I smiled slightly at the predictable response, so focused on the money, rather than the emotional significance of our exchange. Progress would come in small steps, if it came at all. But regardless of how Michael chose to respond to this new dynamic, I had taken a crucial step toward reclaiming my life and my voice. I'm not available Friday, I texted back. I'll let you know when I'm ready to discuss those matters further. Then I set my phone aside and picked up the novel I'd been enjoying, a small act of self-care that now felt not like an indulgence, but like a declaration of independence. 3 weeks after my confrontation with Michael, autumn had fully settled over my neighborhood. The maple trees lining my street blazed with crimson and gold, their falling leaves creating a tapestry across my lawn. My physical recovery had progressed remarkably well. Dr. Chen's medication adjustment had significantly reduced my fatigue, and Sophia's persistent encouragement had helped me rebuild strength I hadn't realized I'd lost long before my surgery. "You're exceeding all recovery benchmarks," Sophia announced during her morning assessment. "Your incisions have healed beautifully, your cardiac function is improving steadily, and your stamina has increased tremendously." "Thanks to you," I acknowledged sincerely. "No," she corrected me with a smile. "Thanks to you following the program and committing to your recovery. I just provided guidance." This pattern of redirecting credit back to me had become characteristic of Sophia's approach. Where once I might have dismissed such comments as mere kindness, I now recognized them as deliberate reinforcement of my agency and capability. During our weeks together, Sophia had subtly but persistently challenged my habit of minimizing my own contributions while magnifying others. "I've been thinking," she said as we prepared for our now routine morning walk. "You may be ready to transition to a different care arrangement. Your physical needs have diminished significantly." A surprising pang of loss shot through me at the thought of our daily sessions ending. Sophia had become more than a healthcare provider. She had become a trusted confidant and, I dared to think, a friend. "I understand," I said, working to keep disappointment from my voice. "You have other patients who need you more." "That's not what I meant," she clarified. "I'm suggesting we adjust, not end. Perhaps 3 mornings a week instead of 5, focusing more on strength building and less on basic care. And," she hesitated briefly, "I wondered if you might consider joining the senior wellness program at Riverside Community Center. James leads a cardiac rehabilitation group there twice weekly." "A group setting?" I questioned, instinctive anxiety rising at the thought. Decades of focusing exclusively on Michael and my teaching career had left my social skills atrophied, my comfort with new connections minimal. "The isolation isn't good for your recovery," Sophia said gently. "Social connections are as important to cardiac health as proper medication and exercise." As we walked through the neighborhood, passing houses where I had lived for 30 years, yet knew few occupants beyond casual greetings, I reflected on how thoroughly I had allowed my world to contract. My identity as Michael's mother and provider had so consumed me that I had neglected to develop or maintain relationships that were solely mine. "I'll consider it," I promised, though the prospect filled me with more trepidation than I cared to admit. The following day brought an unexpected visit from Diana Lawrence, the real estate consultant Robert had introduced. She arrived with architectural renderings and material samples, spreading them across my dining room table with infectious enthusiasm. "I've developed some preliminary concepts for updating your home," she explained. "Nothing requiring structural changes, just strategic modernization that would significantly increase both livability and market value." The designs were thoughtful and practical, an updated kitchen with accessible features cleverly disguised as modern design elements, a primary bathroom renovation that incorporated safety features without institutional aesthetics, improved lighting, and flooring throughout. The projected costs were substantial, but well within the parameters Robert and I had established for this investment. "The improvements would increase your property value by at least 40%, Diana noted. "But more importantly, they would create a space that could adapt to your needs as they change over time." "It's quite an undertaking," I observed, both intrigued and intimidated by the scope of changes. "It is," Diana agreed, "but you wouldn't need to manage it yourself." I work with a contractor who specializes in renovations for mature homeowners. He coordinates everything from permits to final cleanup, with particular sensitivity to minimizing disruption for the resident. As she continued explaining the process, my doorbell rang. Through the window, I glimpsed Vanessa's sleek BMW parked at the curb. "Expecting company?" Diana asked, noting my expression. "My daughter-in-law," I explained. "Unannounced as usual." Diana gathered her materials efficiently. "I can come back another time." "No," I decided firmly. "We're in the middle of a consultation. She can wait or make an appointment like anyone else." Diana's raised eyebrow conveyed surprised approval as I went to answer the door. Vanessa stood on my porch, designer handbag tucked under one arm, holding a bakery box. "Margaret," she greeted me with her practiced smile. "I brought muffins from that artisanal place downtown." "How thoughtful," I said evenly. "However, I'm in the middle of a meeting right now." Her smile faltered as she tried to peer past me into the house. "A meeting? With whom?" "My renovation consultant," I replied, maintaining my position in the doorway. "We're discussing substantial updates to the house." Vanessa's expression shifted rapidly from confusion to calculation. "Renovations? But I thought... That is, Michael mentioned you were considering other options." "I considered them and decided against them," I confirmed. "As I told Michael, several weeks ago I'm staying in my home and adapting it to better serve my needs." Her smile returned, though considerably strained. "Well, that's proactive of you. Perhaps I could join your meeting? I have quite an eye for design. I could offer valuable input." The old Margaret would have acquiesced immediately, apologetic for the exclusion, grateful for any interest Vanessa deigned to show in my affairs. The new Margaret recognized the transparent attempt to insert herself into decisions about my home and finances. "Thank you, but we're midway through a detailed technical discussion," I declined politely but firmly. "Another time, perhaps. I'll take those muffins, though. How thoughtful of you to bring them." As I accepted the bakery box, I added, "I'll call you when I'm free for a proper visit," effectively dismissing her while maintaining basic courtesy. Vanessa blinked, momentarily speechless at the gentle but unmistakable boundary. Yes, of course. I should get back to the office anyway. Very busy with the Harrington accounts." After she left, I returned to the dining room where Diana waited, a poorly suppressed smile playing at her lips. "Well handled," she commented. It felt strange, I admitted, but not unpleasant. "Boundaries often feel strange at first," Diana observed, "like new shoes that need breaking in, but eventually they become more comfortable than going without." We resumed our consultation, but my thoughts kept returning to the interaction with Vanessa. The brief exchange had reinforced something I'd begun to understand intellectually, but was only now experiencing emotionally. Establishing boundaries didn't require hostility or confrontation, merely clarity and consistency. The world didn't, and relationships didn't implode. They simply recalibrated to accommodate new parameters. The following morning, I decided to take Sophia's advice. After our abbreviated session, I asked her to accompany me to the Riverside Community Center to learn more about the cardiac wellness program. The center was housed in a renovated warehouse by the river, its industrial exterior belying the warm, welcoming space inside. Dr. Chen greeted us in the lobby, clearly pleased by my appearance. "Margaret, Sophia mentioned you might visit, but I didn't want to get my hopes up." His genuine enthusiasm helped ease my nervousness as he led us through the facility, explaining the various programs available. The cardiac rehabilitation group met in a sunny room overlooking the river, equipped with specialized exercise equipment and comfortable seating areas for educational components. Our approach combines physical rehabilitation with emotional and social support, Dr. Chen explained. Heart disease affects the whole person, not just the cardiac muscle. As we toured, we passed diverse activity areas, art studios, A community kitchen, computer labs, and multiple fitness spaces adapted for varying ability levels. Seniors and younger people alike engaged in activities throughout the center, creating an intergenerational vibrancy I found unexpectedly appealing. This isn't what I pictured, I admitted. I was expecting something more. Clinical? Geriatric? Dr. Chen suggested with a smile. That's the unfortunate stereotype many seniors programs reinforce. We prefer a community-based model that integrates wellness into meaningful activity. Near the art studio, a gallery displayed members' work: paintings, ceramics, fiber arts, and photography. I paused before a striking watercolor landscape, drawn to its vibrant interpretation of the local riverfront. "Beautiful, isn't it?" said a voice beside me. I turned to find an elegantly dressed woman about my age studying the painting alongside me. Catherine Daniels' work. She started painting after retirement, if you can believe it. Never touched a brush until she was 67. It's extraordinary, I agreed, studying the confident brushwork and sophisticated color relationships. I wouldn't have guessed she was a beginner. Elaine Hoffman, the woman introduced herself, extending her hand. Arts program coordinator and shameless recruiter of new talent. Margaret Reynolds, I replied, shaking her hand. And I'm afraid I have no artistic talent to recruit. Elaine laughed warmly. That's what they all say before they try. Catherine was convinced she'd be terrible. Now she has a waiting list for commissions. She gestured toward the painting. What draws you to this particular piece? The question surprised me, both in its directness and in the realization that I did feel a specific connection to the artwork. The perspective, I said after a moment's reflection. The way the viewer is positioned slightly elevated, looking across the river rather than standing on the bank. It creates distance, but also clarity. Elaine studied me with newfound interest. That's insightful. Most people comment on the colors or the technical skill. Few notice the deliberate perspective choice. She tilted her head slightly. Are you sure you haven't studied art before? Only as a classroom teacher, I explained. Elementary education for 30 years. Art was always part of our curriculum, but I never pursued it personally. The art appreciation classes meet Tuesday afternoons, she said with a smile that managed to be invitational without pressure. We discuss everything from classical masters to contemporary installations. No experience necessary, just curiosity. As we continued our tour, Dr. Chen explained the practical details of membership and program participation. The fees were reasonable, subsidized by community grants and private donations. Transportation services were available for those unable to drive. Scholarships existed for members with financial constraints. What do you think? Sophia asked as we prepared to leave. Could you see yourself participating here? I looked around at the diverse members engaged in various activities, at the sunlight streaming through the large windows, at the atmosphere of purposeful engagement that permeated the space. Yes, I said, surprising myself with the certainty I felt. I think I could. Driving home, I reflected on the unexpected doorways that had opened since my surgery. Connections and possibilities I would never have discovered had circumstances not forced me to reevaluate my life. Robert's financial guidance, Sophia and Dr. Chen's healthcare support, Diana's property expertise, and now potentially new social connections through the community center. Each relationship offered not just practical assistance, but a different perspective on what my life could encompass. For decades, I had poured my energy and resources into a single relationship, my connection with Michael, believing that this singular focus represented the pinnacle of maternal love and responsibility. Now I began to understand that this concentration had not only diminished me, but had ultimately served neither of us well. By making Michael the centerpiece of my existence, I had inadvertently taught him that my purpose was to orbit his needs and desires, a lesson that had shaped him into the self-centered adult he had become. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed A familiar figure sitting on my front steps, Michael, briefcase beside him, expression uncharacteristically subdued. Our conversations since his discovery of my financial independence had been minimal and strained, conducted primarily through brief text messages as he processed this new understanding of his mother. I parked and approached slowly, uncertain what this unannounced visit portended, but determined to maintain the boundaries I had established regardless of his agenda. "Michael," I greeted him calmly, "this is a surprise." He stood, brushing invisible dust from his immaculate suit pants. "I called earlier, but you didn't answer. I thought, well, with your condition." "I was at the community center," I explained, unlocking my front door. "I'm joining their cardiac wellness program." He followed me inside, his expression revealing surprise that I had activities and interests beyond his awareness or involvement. This small revelation, that his mother continued to exist and evolve when not in his presence, seemed genuinely novel to him. "Mom," he began as we settled in the living room, "I've been thinking about our last conversation, about your finances and your decision to stay here." I waited silently, neither encouraging nor discouraging whatever might follow. I realized my approach was inappropriate, he continued, the admission clearly difficult for him. "I was shocked by the revelation that you had significant assets I knew nothing about." I reacted poorly. The acknowledgement, however limited, represented more self-awareness than Michael typically demonstrated. I nodded but maintained my silence, allowing him space to continue without premature absolution. "I've consulted with some colleagues about estate planning," he ventured, watching my reaction carefully. "Not about your specific situation, just generally. They emphasize the importance of transparent communication between family members to ensure proper management and distribution of assets." And there it was, the real purpose of his visit, couched in reasonable-sounding language, but still fundamentally focused on access to my resources. Not concern for my well-being or acknowledgement of his previous behavior, but strategic positioning regarding my estate. "Michael," I said quietly but firmly, "my financial arrangements are thoroughly managed with professional guidance. If and when I wish to discuss them with you, I will initiate that conversation." His expression tightened momentarily before he regained his composure. "Of course. I'm not trying to pry. I just want to make sure everything is properly structured. For your benefit." The hesitation revealed the insincerity. His concern was not for my benefit, but for what might eventually become his. Yet even this transparent self-interest represented progress of a sort. At least now he approached directly rather than manipulating through guilt or feigned concern about my welfare. "I appreciate that," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But what would benefit me most right now is rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms, terms that don't revolve around financial considerations or caretaking arrangements." He looked genuinely perplexed. What would that look like exactly? The question was so guileless, so revealing of his fundamental inability to conceive of our relationship outside of utility and obligation, that I felt a wave of sadness alongside. A renewed determination to create change, not just for myself but potentially for him as well. "It would look like getting to know each other as the people we actually are," I suggested. "Not just as mother and son with all the assumptions and patterns those roles have accumulated, but as individuals with separate lives, interests, and perspectives that might be worth sharing." Michael's brow furrowed as he considered this novel concept. "You mean like friends?" "Something like that," I agreed. "Though friends with a significant shared history and biological connection." He nodded slowly, still processing. "I could try that, I suppose." "Good," I said, rising to indicate the conclusion of our conversation. "Then perhaps we could start with dinner next week. At a restaurant, neutral territory, just conversation, no agenda." As he left, I felt cautiously optimistic. Not naive, enough to expect immediate transformation, but hopeful that even small shifts in our dynamic might eventually lead to something more authentic than what we had maintained for so many years. My phone chimed with a text message from Elaine Hoffman at the community center. Art appreciation registration closing tomorrow. Still have one opening. Interested? Without hesitation, I replied, yes, please save me a spot. The day had brought unexpected connections, the tentative possibility of a recalibrated relationship with my son, and the potential for new friendships beyond my established circle. Each represented a step toward the more expansive life that had begun taking shape since my surgery, a life no longer defined primarily by sacrifice and service, but by genuine engagement with my own needs, interests, and possibilities. As I prepared a simple dinner, I realized that for the first time in decades, I was genuinely curious about what might unfold next in my life. Not anxious, not resigned, but openly anticipating experiences I couldn't yet imagine. This curiosity itself felt revolutionary, a radical departure from the careful management of expectations that had characterized my existence for so long. The promised dinner with Michael took place at Riverstone, a moderately upscale restaurant overlooking the city's waterfront. I arrived 15 minutes early, a lifelong habit born from years of accommodating others' schedules. As I settled at our reserved table, I made a conscious decision not to check my phone repeatedly or scan the entrance anxiously. Instead, I ordered a glass of red wine. Dr. Chen had cleared moderate alcohol consumption now that my medication had stabilized, and observed my surroundings with deliberate attention. The restaurant hummed with conversation and activity, couples and groups enjoying the warm atmosphere and spectacular views. At a nearby table, an elderly couple held hands across the tablecloth, their comfortable silence speaking of decades shared. At another, a group of women my age laughed uproariously over some shared joke, their ease with each other evident in every gesture. I found myself wondering about their stories, their connections, the paths that had brought them to this moment, of evident joy in each other's company. Michael arrived precisely on time, dressed in the impeccable suit he favored for important client meetings. His punctuality surprised me. Throughout his adult life, he had typically arrived at family obligations 10 to 15 minutes late, a subtle but consistent signal of their secondary importance in his hierarchy of commitments. "You're looking well," he observed as he took his seat, genuine surprise coloring his tone. "Really well, actually." I understood his reaction. In the 6 weeks since my surgery, my appearance had indeed transformed significantly. Regular exercise had added color to my complexion and improved my posture. My hair, previously cut in the utilitarian style I'd worn for decades, had been restyled in a more flattering gray bob on Sophia's recommendation. Most notably, I had begun updating my wardrobe beyond the practical, unremarkable clothes that had long served as my uniform. Tonight, I wore a deep teal blouse that complemented my eyes and a silver pendant Robert had gifted me to celebrate my recovery progress. "Thank you," I replied simply. "The cardiac rehabilitation program has been tremendously beneficial." "The community center thing?" he asked, scanning the wine list. "I looked it up online. Seems active for someone in your condition." "My condition continues to improve," I noted, letting the subtle condescension pass without comment. "Dr. Chen, Sophia's husband, supervises the cardiac program personally. He's quite renowned in his field." Michael ordered an expensive scotch, then set the drink menu aside with a deliberately casual air. "So you wanted to talk about getting to know each other better, you said." His tone suggested mild skepticism, as if the concept remained fundamentally foreign to him. I recognized the challenge inherent in his posture. Prove this exercise has value, or I'll dismiss it as sentimental nonsense. "I realized recently that while you know the mother I've been to you, you know very little about me as a person separate from that role," I began. "And conversely, I know the son you've been to me, but perhaps not the person you are beyond our relationship." He sipped his scotch when it arrived, regarding me over the rim with guarded curiosity. What specifically did you want to know? Perhaps we could start with something simple. What do you enjoy most about your work? Not the success or status it provides, but the actual practice of law itself. The question seemed to surprise him. Our conversations about his career had always centered on achievements. Cases won, clients secured, promotions earned. Never had I inquired about the intrinsic satisfaction he might derive from his profession. I enjoy the strategy, he said, after a moment's reflection. Constructing arguments, anticipating counterpoints, finding precedents that support our position. It's like elaborate chess played with legal concepts instead of pieces. A genuine animation entered his expression. Last month I found an obscure ruling from 1978 that completely undermined the opposition's central argument. They never saw it coming. As he elaborated on the case, I glimpsed something I had rarely witnessed in our adult interactions: authentic, enthusiasm uncalculated for effect. This passion for intellectual strategy revealed a dimension of Michael I had insufficiently appreciated, perhaps because I had been so focused on the material benefits his career provided, rather than the inherent satisfactions it might offer. You truly love the work itself, I observed when he finished, not just the rewards it brings. He seemed momentarily startled by this insight. I suppose I do, though the rewards certainly don't hurt. He studied me with new curiosity. What about you? Did you enjoy teaching? You never really talked about it except to complain about administration or difficult parents. The question revealed how little we had shared about our authentic experiences. For 30 years, I had taught elementary school children, yet my son knew almost nothing about my professional life beyond its practical implications for our household. I loved it, I said simply, particularly mathematics instruction. Finding ways to make abstract concepts accessible to different learning styles, watching a child's face when a difficult concept suddenly clicks into focus. There's nothing quite like that moment of illumination. You taught math? I always thought you were a general elementary teacher. I specialized in mathematics education, I explained. I developed supplementary curriculum materials that were adopted by several districts in the state. There was even talk of publishing them more widely before budget cuts eliminated the initiative. Michael stared at me, visibly recalibrating his understanding. I had no idea. There's a lot we don't know about each other, I acknowledged without accusation. That's what I'm suggesting we might change. The remainder of dinner unfolded with surprising ease. We exchanged stories and perspectives we had never previously shared. His frustrations with firm politics, my fondest memories of classroom breakthroughs, books that had influenced our thinking, places we hoped to visit. Someday. Not once did he mention my finances, the house, or Cedar Crest. As we waited for dessert, Michael hesitated, then asked, "Why didn't you tell me about your investments? All those years you worked so hard, lived so frugally? Why keep it secret?" The question was inevitable, though I had hoped it might come later in our evolving relationship. Still, his tone lacked the entitled indignation of our previous conversation, carrying instead what seemed like genuine curiosity. Initially, it was about teaching financial independence, I explained carefully. I wanted you to develop your own resources rather than relying on an inheritance as a safety net. Later, it became a form of protection, I suppose. Protection from what? His brow furrowed. From being valued primarily for what I could provide, rather than who I am. The words emerged with a directness that surprised even me. Michael flinched slightly. That's what you think? That I only value you for financial support? What evidence would suggest otherwise? I asked gently. When was the last time you called just to share something that made you happy? Or asked about my interests or concerns? Our interactions have centered almost exclusively on what you need or what I can contribute. He started to protest, then stopped, visibly reflecting on our history. I'm not sure what to say to that. You don't need to say anything right now, I assured him. Just consider it. Relationships reveal their true nature through patterns of behavior over time, not single conversations or declarations. As we parted in the parking lot, Michael surprised me with an awkward but seemingly genuine hug. This was different, he said, but not in a bad way. It's a start, I agreed. Driving home, I marveled at how different this interaction had felt. Not because Michael had dramatically transformed, but because I had approached our relationship from a position of self-respect and clear-eyed assessment rather than desperate hope for validation. By releasing my need for his approval, I had created space for authentic connection without the suffocating weight of unmet expectations. The following week brought the commencement of my home renovations. Diana had coordinated everything meticulously, arranging for me to stay in a fully furnished apartment nearby, while the most disruptive work was completed. The temporary relocation proved unexpectedly refreshing, a neutral environment free from decades of accumulated habits and associations. Robert visited my temporary residence one evening, bringing takeout from my favorite Mediterranean restaurant and updates on my investment portfolio. The technology stock split yielded even better returns than projected, he reported, and the commercial property on Elm Street has 3 potential tenants bidding for the lease. That's excellent news, I acknowledged, though financial details no longer commanded my attention as they once had. Since my surgery and subsequent reevaluation of priorities, money had assumed its proper place in my consciousness, important, as a tool for security and opportunity, but no longer the primary measure of success or worth. Robert seemed to notice my changed perspective. You know, in 15 years as your financial advisor, I've never seen you this present. Usually you're checking emails or making notes about school matters while we discuss investments. I'm learning to give full attention to what's actually happening, not what might need attention later, I explained. Apparently, it took major surgery to teach me that particular lesson. He smiled warmly. Some lessons arrive in unexpected packages. As we enjoyed our meal, Robert shared news about his daughter's recent promotion and his own consideration of partial retirement. The easy exchange of personal updates highlighted another shift in my relationships, the gradual dissolution of rigid boundaries between professional connections and personal ones, allowing more authentic human interaction to flourish. I've been meaning to ask, Robert said as he helped clear our dinner containers. Have you given any more thought to the estate planning changes we discussed? No pressure, just checking if you've reached any decisions. After my confrontation with Michael about my finances, I had consulted with Robert regarding potential adjustments to my estate plan. The original arrangement had designated Michael as the primary beneficiary of nearly everything, with a small educational trust for Aiden. Now I was reconsidering this distribution in light of my evolved understanding of effective giving and personal legacy. I confirmed. I'd like to proceed with the changes we discussed. Establishing the educational foundation feels right. Continuing to support mathematics education for underserved students would honor my teaching career in a meaningful way. Robert nodded approvingly. I think it's an excellent decision. The foundation can make a significant impact with the funding you're considering. And the revised provisions for Michael and Aiden still provide substantial support while encouraging self-sufficiency. The new arrangement would leave Michael a meaningful but not excessive inheritance, with additional funds placed in a trust for Aiden's education and well-being. The majority of my estate would establish a foundation supporting mathematics education, initiatives in under-resourced communities, programs that would provide the kind of opportunities I had spent my career trying to create with far fewer resources. I'll have the paperwork drawn up next week, Robert promised. After he left, I sat on the balcony of my temporary apartment, watching twilight settle over the city. The decisions I had made about my home, my finances, my relationship with Michael, and ultimately my legacy, reflected a fundamental shift in how I understood my life's purpose and value. Where once I had measured my worth primarily through sacrifice and service to others, particularly my son, I now recognized the legitimacy of my own needs, desires, and vision. This recognition wasn't selfish, as my younger self might have feared. Rather, it created the foundation for more authentic giving, contributions stemming from genuine purpose rather than obligation or insecurity. By claiming proper stewardship of my resources, financial, emotional, and temporal, I could direct them toward truly meaningful impact rather than allowing them to be depleted through unexamined patterns of giving. The following day brought my first art appreciation class at the community center. I arrived early, uncertainty mingling with anticipation as I entered the sunlit studio where about a dozen people were already gathering. Elaine spotted me immediately, waving me over to an empty seat she had saved. "Margaret, I'm so glad you decided to join us," she said warmly, introducing me to several other participants. The group spanned diverse ages and backgrounds: a retired physician, a former librarian, a young mother with a background in graphic design, a carpenter who created elaborate wooden sculptures in his spare time. Today we're discussing the evolution of landscape painting from the Romantic period through contemporary interpretations, Elaine explained, as she distributed high-quality art prints and reference materials. The question we're considering is how perspective, both literal and figurative, shapes our experience of natural environments. The discussion that followed was lively and engaging, weaving technical observations about composition and color with philosophical considerations about humanity's relationship with nature. I found myself contributing more actively than I had anticipated, drawing connections between artistic techniques and the emotional responses they evoked. "That's a fascinating observation, Margaret," Elaine noted after I commented on how shifting horizon lines in the various works affected the viewer's sense of scale and significance. "You have an excellent eye for compositional impact." The simple acknowledgement, recognition of a capacity I hadn't known I possessed, sent a small thrill of pleasure through me. Throughout my life, I had received affirmation primarily for practical capabilities, efficient management, reliable performance, consistent support of others. Rarely had anyone noted or valued my perceptiveness, insight, or unique perspective. After class, several participants invited me to join them for coffee at the center's cafe. The conversation flowed easily from art to personal stories, shared recommendations for books and local events, and gentle humor about the challenges of aging. I found myself laughing more freely than I had in years, engaged in dialogue that carried no agenda beyond genuine connection and exchange of ideas. As I drove home afterward, I realized I had experienced something that had been notably absent from my life for decades: the simple joy of being fully present in a moment of shared interest and connection, unburdened by calculation of obligations or expectations. The feeling was both foreign and strangely familiar, perhaps a reconnection with aspects of myself that had been submerged beneath years of determined self-sacrifice and narrowly defined purpose. The community center quickly became a central element in my expanding life. Beyond the art appreciation class, I joined Dr. Chen's cardiac rehabilitation group 3 mornings weekly and volunteered 2 afternoons in the center's intergenerational reading program, helping elementary students develop literacy skills. Each activity connected me with different people who knew me not as Michael's mother or Margaret the reliable teacher, but simply as the person I was becoming in this new chapter. 6 weeks into my rehabilitation program, Dr. Chen conducted a comprehensive evaluation of my cardiac function and overall health. "Remarkable progress," he concluded, reviewing the results. "Your heart function has improved significantly. Blood pressure optimal, cholesterol levels responding well to medication, exercise capacity substantially increased. I feel better than I have in years, I confirmed. More energy, better sleep, fewer aches and pains. He smiled approvingly. The physical improvements are impressive, but equally important are the psychological and social components of your recovery. Sophia mentions you've developed quite a network at the center. It's been unexpectedly rewarding, I acknowledged. I never realized how isolated I had become until I experienced the alternative. Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. Isolation is a significant risk factor for cardiac patients, as damaging as smoking or poor diet, according to recent research. The connections you're building aren't just enriching your life, they're literally strengthening your heart. His observation crystallized something I had been intuiting but hadn't fully articulated: the profound interconnection between physical health, emotional well-being, and social engagement. My surgery had initially appeared as an isolated medical crisis, but in reality, it had been the physical manifestation of a broader pattern of imbalance throughout my life, giving endlessly without adequate replenishment, maintaining connections that depleted rather than nourished, and neglecting the fundamental human need for reciprocal, affirming relationships. Your renovation should be completed next week, correct? Dr. Chen asked as our appointment concluded. Yes, final inspections are scheduled for Tuesday. I can move back home on Thursday if all goes well. Excellent timing. The center is hosting its autumn celebration next Saturday. Art exhibitions, musical performances, demonstrations from various programs. Perfect opportunity to show off your refreshed home with a small gathering afterward, perhaps? The suggestion would have terrified me just months ago. Hosting a social event, inviting comparative strangers into my private space, positioning myself at the center of attention rather than in a supporting role. Now, however, the idea sparked immediate enthusiasm. That's a wonderful suggestion, I agreed. A housewarming to mark this new chapter. As I left the center that afternoon, I found myself contemplating the nature of true transformation. It wasn't the dramatic external changes, the renovated home, the improved health, the adjusted financial arrangements, that constituted the most significant shift in my life. Rather, it was the internal recalibration of values and perspectives, the willingness to claim authentic space in my own existence, and the courage to engage with life from a position of self-respect rather than self-abnegation. These internal shifts had catalyzed the external changes, not the other way around. By recognizing my inherent worth beyond utility to others, I had naturally begun creating a life that reflected this understanding, one characterized by balance, meaningful connection, and purposeful contribution rather than endless accommodation and depletion. My phone chimed with a text message from Michael. Mom, Vanessa mentioned your house renovations are almost complete. We'd like to see the changes when you're settled. Also, Aiden has been asking about his grandmother. I smiled. At this small but significant evolution, Michael wasn't yet where I might hope. His message still carried a hint of the transactional approach that had long characterized our relationship. But the mention of Aiden's interest and the request, rather than assumption about visiting, represented modest progress. The renovations should be finished next week, I texted back. I'm planning a small housewarming gathering on Saturday afternoon with some friends from the community center. You, Vanessa, and Aiden would be welcome to join if you'd like to meet some of my new acquaintances. His response came quickly. Friends from the community center? The brief question conveyed volumes about his surprise that his mother had developed a social circle independent of family connections. Rather than feeling defensive or apologetic about this development, I felt a quiet satisfaction. My expanding world challenged his limited perception of me, creating space for a more authentic relationship based on who we actually were rather than the roles we had rigidly maintained. Yes, I replied simply. I've met some wonderful people through various programs there. I think you'd enjoy meeting them as well. As I drove home to my temporary apartment, autumn sunlight gilded the changing leaves along the boulevard. The beauty caught my attention in a way it might not have just months ago, when I would have been preoccupied with endless mental calculations about others' needs and my responsibilities. Now I found myself fully present to the moment, appreciating the simple gift of existence amidst such natural splendor. My son had once called me a burden, unaware of my hidden fortune. The painful irony of that moment had initiated a journey of profound transformation, not because of the financial resources themselves, but because the incident had finally illuminated the devastating imbalance in our relationship and my own complicity in maintaining it. The true fortune I had discovered wasn't measured in investment returns or property values, substantial though they were. It was the recognition of my intrinsic worth beyond utility to others, the courage to live from that recognition, and the joy that naturally flowed from authentic engagement with life on my own terms. This fortune, unlike its financial counterpart, could never be depleted through sharing. It only grew more abundant with each genuine connection and consciously chosen experience. Thursday morning dawned bright and clear, the perfect day to return home. Diana had coordinated the final details of my move back with characteristic efficiency, arranging for the cleaning crew to finish yesterday and scheduling my return for 10 a.m. after rush hour, but with most of the day remaining to settle in. When I pulled into my driveway, I almost drove past the house, momentarily not recognizing my own property. The exterior transformation was subtle but significant. New landscaping with native plants requiring minimal maintenance, improved lighting along the walkway, and a covered porch area where previously there had been only a concrete slab with a simple railing. The house itself had been repainted in a warm taupe with crisp white trim, replacing the faded beige that had remained unchanged for 15 years. Diana greeted me at the door, barely containing her excitement. Ready for the grand tour? Stepping inside, I felt a momentary disorientation, like entering a familiar dream slightly altered in crucial details. The basic footprint remained unchanged, but practically every surface had been updated. The dated carpet had been replaced with warm hardwood floors. The kitchen now featured accessible cabinetry with pull-down shelves, energy-efficient appliances, and an island with seating that eliminated the need for the separate dinette that had cluttered the space before. "The modifications are beautiful," I remarked, running my hand over the smooth quartz countertop. "Practical without looking institutional." "That was precisely the goal," Diana agreed. "Every accessibility feature is integrated into the design, aesthetically. Most people would never realize the special accommodations unless they were pointed out." The primary bathroom had been completely reconfigured to include a curbless shower with a built-in bench, elegant grab bars disguised as towel racks, and a comfort height vanity. The overall effect was spa-like rather than clinical, emphasizing luxury and comfort rather than disability accommodation. My former spare bedroom, long serving as little more than a storage room, had been transformed into a multi-purpose space with built-in shelving, a comfortable reading area, and a desk overlooking the backyard. "I took the liberty of setting up a proper workspace," Diana explained. "Robert mentioned you were considering some consulting work with educational publishers." Indeed, a conversation with a former colleague had led to an opportunity to review mathematics curriculum materials for a major educational publisher, work I could do from home on my own schedule, utilizing my decades of classroom experience. The prospect of contributing professionally again, even on a limited basis, had energized me in unexpected ways. As we completed the tour, Diana handed me a leather portfolio containing all the relevant documentation, warranties, care instructions, contractor information for any future needs, and before and after photographs documenting the transformation. "There's one more thing," she said, leading me back to the kitchen. "A housewarming gift from Robert and me." On the counter stood a sleek espresso machine with a red bow attached and a basket of premium coffee beans beside it. "Robert mentioned, you developed a taste for proper espresso during your stay in the temporary apartment," Diana explained. "We thought you might enjoy continuing that small luxury here." The thoughtful gesture touched me deeply. Not just the gift itself, but the attentive friendship it represented. These people had observed what brought me pleasure and sought to extend that enjoyment, an experience notably absent from my relationship with Michael and Vanessa. After Diana left, I spent the afternoon reacquainting myself with my transformed space, arranging personal items and adjusting to the new flow of the home. Around 4 o'clock, my doorbell rang. Through the new security system's camera, I saw Sophia and Dr. Chen standing on my porch, holding what appeared to be a flowering plant. "Welcome home, housewarming committee," Sophia announced cheerfully when I opened the door. "We come bearing gifts and medical curiosity about your new accommodations." Their professional assessment of the renovations quickly evolved into a casual early dinner when Dr. Chen produced a bag containing gourmet sandwiches and salads from my favorite local deli. As we ate at my new kitchen island, the conversation flowed easily from renovation details to community center happenings to their children's recent accomplishments. "We have some news that might interest you," Dr. Chen mentioned as we finished our meal. "The center is expanding its educational outreach program. The board approved funding for a mathematics enrichment initiative for underserved students in the district." "That's wonderful," I responded sincerely. "The need is certainly there. When I was teaching, we constantly struggled with insufficient resources for advanced instruction, particularly in schools with predominantly lower-income populations." "Actually," Sophia interjected, exchanging a meaningful glance with her husband, "we were hoping you might consider consulting on the program development. Your background in elementary mathematics education would be invaluable in designing effective interventions." The invitation caught me by surprise. Me? But I've been retired for 2 years, and my approach might be outdated compared to current methodologies. Dr. Chen shook his head firmly. "Foundational mathematical understanding doesn't change with educational fads. Your experience with diverse learning styles and practical classroom implementation is exactly what we need to balance the theoretical perspectives already represented on the committee." Their confidence in my professional capacity stirred something that had lain dormant since my retirement: the educator's desire to contribute meaningfully to students' development, particularly those most frequently overlooked by educational systems. "I'd be honored to help," I said finally, "though I'd want to review current research before making specific recommendations." Exactly the response we expected, Sophia smiled. Thorough and conscientious as always. After they left, I sat in my new reading nook, watching twilight settle over the backyard while contemplating this unexpected opportunity. The prospect of applying my professional experience in service to a cause I deeply valued represented yet another dimension of my expanding life: reconnection with my identity as an educator in a context that honored rather than exploited my expertise. Saturday arrived with perfect autumn weather for my housewarming gathering. The morning brought a flurry of preparations, arranging fresh flowers delivered from the local florist, setting out the catered hors d'oeuvres Robert had insisted on, providing and making final adjustments to the carefully selected playlist of jazz standards streaming through the new sound system. Elaine arrived first, bearing a striking ceramic platter she had created in the center's pottery studio. "Every home needs at least one handmade object with a story," she declared, demonstrating how the glazing technique captured the colors of a sunset over water. Gradually, other guests arrived. Several members from the art appreciation group, Dr. Chen and Sophia, Robert and Diana, and even my former colleague from the school district, who had connected me with the educational publishing opportunity. Each brought thoughtful housewarming gifts reflecting their understanding of my emerging interests and preferences: books on art history, a membership to the botanical garden, a beautiful journal for recording observations about the artwork. We discussed in class. I found myself moving comfortably among my guests, introducing people with common interests, ensuring everyone had refreshments, and sharing the story of my renovation journey. The ease with which I hosted this gathering, something I would have found daunting just months ago, reflected how thoroughly my self-perception had shifted. No longer defining myself primarily through service to others, I had discovered the capacity to create and nurture a community based on mutual interests and genuine connection. At precisely 3 o'clock, the time I had suggested in my text, the doorbell rang. Michael stood on the porch holding Aiden's hand, with Vanessa slightly behind them. My grandson's face lit up with recognition. "Grandma!" he exclaimed, breaking, free from his father's grip to wrap his arms around my legs. "Hello, sweetheart," I greeted him, crouching despite my healing sternum to give him a proper hug. At 2.5, Aiden had reached the age of enthusiastic affection, his personality emerging more distinctly with each visit. Though these had been infrequent, I had treasured each opportunity to know this bright, curious child. Michael surveyed the scene behind me with poorly concealed surprise. The house full of people engaged in animated conversation, the sophisticated catering, the background music creating an atmosphere of relaxed elegance. This reality clearly contradicted his mental image of his mother hosting a small, modest gathering of elderly neighbors. "Quite a party," he observed, handing me a gift bag. "The house looks different. Very different." "Complete renovation," I confirmed, ushering them inside. "Diana Lawrence managed the project. She's the woman in the burgundy dress by the bookcase. Let me introduce you to some people." I guided them through the gathering, making deliberate introductions, highlighting the diverse backgrounds and interests represented. "This is Elaine, the arts program coordinator at the community center. She's teaching me to appreciate Impressionist painting. Dr. Chen, who supervises my cardiac rehabilitation and serves on the center's education committee. Robert, you know, of course." As I facilitated these introductions, I observed Michael's expression shifting from polite disinterest to genuine engagement, particularly when conversing with Dr. Chen about recent advances in preventative cardiology, and with one of the art group members who happened to share his interest in historical biographies. Vanessa remained more reserved, though she brightened considerably when Diana initiated a conversation about the renovation process, responding to Vanessa's professional interest in interior design with thoughtful insights about accessible design, principles that preserved aesthetic appeal. Throughout the gathering, I noticed Michael watching me with an increasingly puzzled expression, observing as I discussed mathematical pedagogical theory with my former colleague, laughed at an inside joke with Elaine about our last art class, and received compliments on the success of my rehabilitation from various friends familiar with my journey. As guests began departing around 5 o'clock, Vanessa announced she needed to take Aiden home for his dinner and bedtime routine. "Michael can stay longer if he wants," she added, surprising me with this flexibility. "I have everything handled, at home." After they left, Michael helped me gather empty glasses and plates, carrying them to the kitchen with uncharacteristic thoughtfulness. "That was eye-opening," he said finally, leaning against the new island. "Those people really know you, not just superficially, but they understand things about you I didn't even realize." I loaded the dishwasher, considering my response carefully. "They know the person I am now, which is both less and more than the mother you've known." "Less and more?" he questioned. "They haven't witnessed my history or family role, but they see aspects of me that have rarely been visible within our relationship." I closed the dishwasher and turned to face him directly. "They know me as someone with perspectives and capabilities, separate from my identity as your mother." He nodded slowly, processing this reality. "It's strange. All these years, I think I've defined you entirely through your relationship to me, and apparently missed quite a lot in the process." The acknowledgement, however limited, represented significant progress in his self-awareness. Rather than pressing the point, I suggested we move to the back patio with cups of coffee from my new espresso machine. The early evening air carried a pleasant crispness as we settled into the comfortable new outdoor furniture. For several minutes, we sat in surprisingly comfortable silence, watching birds visit the native plant garden Diana had incorporated into the backyard redesign. "Mom," Michael began hesitantly, "I've been thinking about what you said at dinner that night, about how our relationship has been primarily transactional, about how you felt valued mostly for what you could provide." I waited silently, allowing him space to continue without interruption or reassurance. At first, I was defensive, but then I started paying attention to my own patterns. He stared into his coffee cup, avoiding eye contact. "When Vanessa asked last week if we should invite you to Aiden's preschool fall festival, my first thought was whether you could help with the bake sale, not whether you'd enjoy seeing your grandson perform." He grimaced slightly. "That's not great." "It's a pattern we established together," I acknowledged, neither absolving him completely nor assuming all responsibility. I made myself available primarily as a resource rather than as a person with legitimate needs and interests of my own. "But I took advantage of that availability," he countered with unexpected insight. "And when you started changing the dynamic, setting boundaries, making independent decisions, I resented it rather than respecting it." This level of self-reflection exceeded anything I had anticipated from our conversation. Without rushing to reassure him or minimize the accuracy of his assessment, I simply nodded in recognition of the truth he had articulated. "I don't know how to have a different kind of relationship," he admitted after another extended silence. "I'm not sure I even know what that would look like in practice." "Neither do I entirely," I acknowledged. "But I'm learning that meaningful relationships involve genuine reciprocity, not perfect balance in every interaction, but mutual respect for each person's wholeness over time." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense theoretically, but practically?" "Practically, it means I'll continue making choices based on my authentic needs and values," I explained. "Sometimes those choices will align with your preferences, sometimes they won't. Either way, they'll reflect my best discernment rather than an automatic prioritization of others' wishes over my own." "And what would it mean for me?" he asked, meeting my eyes directly. "That would be for you to determine," I said gently. "I can only speak to my side of the relationship." He seemed to appreciate this refusal to prescribe his role or responsibilities, this respect for his autonomy to define his own approach. After a moment, he ventured, "Maybe it could start with getting to know who you actually are now, not just who I've assumed you to be." "That would be a meaningful beginning," I agreed. As twilight deepened into evening, our conversation shifted to lighter topics: Aiden's developing vocabulary, an interesting case Michael was researching, my upcoming art appreciation field trip to the museum downtown. The exchange felt different from our previous interactions, more balanced, less performative, genuinely curious rather than obligatory or extractive. When Michael finally rose to leave, he paused in the doorway, seeming to search for appropriate words. "Thank you," he said finally. "Not just for today, but for seeing a better possibility for both of us." After he departed, I returned to the patio, savoring the peaceful conclusion to a significant day. The gathering had exceeded my expectations, not just in its social success, but in the unexpected opening it had created with Michael. While I harbored no illusions about instant transformation in our relationship, I recognized the importance of his nascent awareness of the patterns we had established and maintained. More broadly, the day represented a milestone in my personal journey, tangible evidence of the life I was actively creating rather than merely responding to. My renovated home reflected my reclaimed agency. My diverse guests represented the expanding community I had cultivated. My comfortable hosting demonstrated newfound confidence in my social identity beyond prescribed family roles. Most significantly, My interaction with Michael illustrated the profound truth that genuine transformation begins with internal shifts in perception and value rather than external demands for different treatment. By changing how I understood and presented myself, by honoring my own worth rather than seeking validation through self-abnegation, I had inevitably altered the dynamics of every relationship in my life. As stars emerged in the darkening sky, I felt profound gratitude for the painful awakening that had initiated this journey. My son calling me a burden after surgery, unaware of my hidden financial resources, had ultimately revealed a far more significant form of wealth, the capacity to author my own life story rather than existing primarily as a supporting character in others' narratives. The financial fortune had provided practical options, certainly. But the true transformation had emerged from the recognition that my value was inherent rather than earned through service, my purpose self-determined rather than externally imposed, and my happiness a legitimate priority rather than an optional consideration subordinate to others' needs. This understanding represented the most valuable inheritance I could potentially offer my son and grandson, not financial assets to be managed or depleted, but the living example of authentic self-respect and purposeful engagement with life's possibilities at every age. The Mathematics Enrichment Committee met for the first time on a Wednesday afternoon in late October. The community center had allocated a spacious conference room for our use, with large windows overlooking the river where autumn colors reflected in the water's surface. 6 of us gathered around the table, 2 current elementary teachers, a curriculum coordinator from the district, a university mathematics professor specializing in education, Dr. Chen representing the center's administration, and myself bringing the perspective of a retired educator with extensive classroom experience. "Thank you all for committing to this initiative," Dr. Chen began, distributing folders containing the program parameters and preliminary budget. "As you know, our goal is to develop mathematics enrichment opportunities for students in the district's 5 lowest-performing elementary schools. The grant provides funding for materials, instructor stipends, and transportation for after-school and weekend sessions." As the discussion progressed, I found myself fully engaged in a familiar yet freshly energizing professional dialogue. The curriculum coordinator, a young woman named Tasha Williams, outlined current district challenges with mathematics achievement gaps. "Our standardized testing shows persistent disparities along socioeconomic lines," she explained. "Students in these 5 schools perform significantly below district averages in mathematical reasoning and problem-solving, though their computation skills often measure at acceptable levels. That pattern suggests instructional emphasis on procedures rather than conceptual understanding," I noted. Memories of similar challenges during my teaching career surfacing immediately. Students learn how to execute algorithms without grasping the underlying mathematical relationships. Tasha nodded vigorously. "Exactly. Teachers face such time constraints and performance pressure that they often resort to drilling procedures that will appear on standardized tests, which creates the illusion of mathematical competence while actually limiting long-term development," added Dr. Eliza Ramirez, the university professor. "Students hit a wall in later grades when conceptual understanding becomes essential for advanced applications." The conversation continued, weaving together theoretical frameworks with practical implementation challenges. I found myself offering concrete strategies I had developed over decades in the classroom, approaches that engaged diverse learners through manipulatives, visual representations, and real-world applications rather than abstract formulas memorized. Without context. "Margaret, these activity sequences are brilliant," Eliza commented when I shared sample lesson structures I had designed. "They build conceptual understanding through discovery rather than imposition. Have you published any of this material?" "Not formally," I admitted. "I created most of it for my own classroom use, though I shared frameworks with colleagues in the district." "This approach should absolutely form the foundation of our program," Tasha insisted. "It addresses precisely the gaps we're seeing in student understanding." By the end of the 3-hour meeting, we had established a clear direction for the program, assigned development responsibilities among committee members, and scheduled our next session. I had volunteered to design the 4th and 5th grade curriculum components, focusing on fractions and early algebraic reasoning, areas where conceptual misunderstandings most frequently derailed student progress. As the meeting concluded, Eliza approached me privately. "Margaret, I've been looking for a co-author on a textbook project focused on elementary mathematics pedagogy. My expertise is in theoretical frameworks, but I need a collaborator with extensive classroom implementation experience. Would you be interested in discussing the possibility?" The invitation caught me completely by surprise. Co-author? I've never written for publication beyond district curriculum materials. "But you should have," she replied emphatically. "What you shared today demonstrates profound understanding of how children construct mathematical meaning. The field needs more resources bridging theory and practice, especially from educators with your depth of experience." We arranged to meet the following week to discuss the project further. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how dramatically my professional identity was reactivating after 2 years of presumed retirement. The skills and knowledge I had developed over 30 years of teaching, resources I had assumed held limited value beyond my classroom, suddenly represented valuable expertise in multiple contexts. This realization paralleled my broader journey of rediscovering my worth beyond utility to family members. Just as Michael had defined me primarily through my role as his mother, I had perhaps defined myself too narrowly through immediate service to my students and school community, undervaluing the broader significance of my professional knowledge and experience. The following day brought another unexpected opportunity. Robert called to discuss a financial matter, then added casually, "By the way, the Community Foundation Board is seeking new members for the Education Committee. I mentioned your background, and they're quite interested in having you join if you're willing." "The Community Foundation?" I questioned, vaguely familiar with the organization that administered philanthropic funds throughout the county. "They oversee grant distribution to educational initiatives," Robert explained. "Given your professional background and now your work with the community center's mathematics program, you'd bring valuable perspective to their funding decisions." The invitation represented yet another dimension of potential contribution, helping direct financial resources toward effective educational interventions throughout the community. The prospect was both daunting and intriguing. "I'd need to learn more about their process and expectations," I said cautiously. "Of course," Robert agreed. "The committee chair would be happy to meet with you informally to discuss details before you make any commitment." That weekend, my exploration of new possibilities extended in yet another direction when Elaine invited me to accompany her to the opening of a special exhibition at the city's art museum. The curator, a former colleague of hers, would be giving a private tour for a small group before the public opening. "You've demonstrated such insightful perspective in our discussions," Elaine explained. "I'd value your observations on this collection." The exhibition featured contemporary interpretations of classical themes, modern artists engaging with traditional subject matter through innovative techniques and perspectives. As our small group moved through the galleries, I found myself deeply engaged not only with the artwork, but with the intellectual exchange surrounding it. The curator posed thoughtful questions about how contemporary approaches altered or illuminated classical subjects, and I discovered my contributions were received with genuine interest rather than polite tolerance. "You have a remarkable way of connecting visual elements with thematic content," the curator commented, after I noted how one artist's unconventional perspective created dissonance that reinforced the work's message about social disruption. "Have you studied art criticism formally?" "Not at all," I admitted. "I'm relatively new to serious art appreciation." "Then you have a natural gift for visual analysis," she replied. "Some of the most insightful critics come to the field without formal training, but with fresh perspectives and sharp observational skills." After the tour, Elaine and I enjoyed lunch at the museum cafe, discussing the exhibition and our different responses to specific works. As our conversation concluded, she mentioned casually, "The museum is seeking volunteer docents for their educational outreach program. Given your teaching background and your perceptive engagement with art, you might consider applying. The training program starts next month." The suggestion sparked immediate interest. Serving as a docent would combine my educational expertise with my growing passion for art appreciation, creating yet another avenue for meaningful engagement beyond the narrow confines I had previously accepted as appropriate for a woman of my age and circumstances. Driving home, I marveled at how rapidly my life was expanding. In just 2 months since my surgery, opportunities for contribution and connection had multiplied beyond anything I could have anticipated. The Mathematics Enrichment Committee, the potential textbook collaboration, the Community Foundation invitation, and now the museum docent possibility, each represented a thread in an increasingly rich tapestry of purpose and engagement. That evening, as I updated my calendar to accommodate these emerging commitments, my phone rang. Michael's name appeared on the screen. "Mom, are you free for lunch tomorrow?" he asked without preamble. "There's something I'd like to discuss with you." The old anxiety, "What does he need now?" flared briefly before I recognized and released it. "I have a meeting with Dr. Ramirez from the university at 11, but I could meet you at 1 o'clock, if that works for your schedule." "The university?" he questioned, surprise evident in his tone. "Yes, we're discussing a potential textbook collaboration on elementary mathematics pedagogy." The simple statement of fact, unaccompanied by minimization or apology for my activities, represented another small but significant shift in our dynamic. "That sounds impressive," Michael said after a brief pause. 1 o'clock works fine. Callaway's on 5th Street? Perfect, I agreed. I'll see you then. The restaurant Michael had chosen was upscale but not ostentatious, known for excellent food and an atmosphere conducive to conversation. When I arrived precisely at 1, I found him already seated at a quiet corner table, checking his watch. A reversal of our typical pattern where I would arrive early and wait for him to appear, several minutes past the appointed time. "You look well," he observed as I settled across from him. "Really well, actually." I acknowledged the comment with a smile. "I feel well. The cardiac rehabilitation program continues to produce results, and I'm enjoying my various activities." After we ordered, Michael seemed uncharacteristically hesitant, arranging and rearranging his silverware before finally getting to the purpose of our meeting. "I've been doing some thinking since your housewarming," he began, "about our relationship, about how I've approached things. I even talked with my therapist about it." "You're seeing a therapist?" I couldn't hide my surprise. Michael had always dismissed therapy as unnecessary emotional indulgence. When I had suggested it during particularly stressful periods of his life, he nodded, a touch defensively. "Started about 6 months ago. Vanessa insisted after some difficulties we were having, primarily about my work-life balance and its impact on our family." This revelation shifted my understanding significantly. Perhaps his capacity for self-reflection hadn't emerged spontaneously, but had been developing through professional guidance, a resource he had previously rejected but now apparently valued. "That's commendable," I said sincerely. "Seeking perspective from a qualified professional can be tremendously beneficial." "It has been," he acknowledged. "And one of the things Dr. Winters has helped me recognize is how I've approached relationships, particularly with you, from a primarily transactional perspective. Always calculating what I could get rather than what I could contribute or share." The insight aligned perfectly with my own understanding of our dynamic. though hearing it articulated by Michael himself carried different weight than my private recognition of these patterns. She suggested that I might consider what a more balanced relationship could look like, he continued, and then actually take concrete steps toward creating it, rather than just intellectualizing about the concept. I nodded encouragingly, but maintained my silence, allowing him to navigate this conversation without rescue or redirection. "So I have a proposal," he said, straightening slightly in his chair. "Aiden's preschool has Grandparents' Day coming. Up next Friday. They do a special breakfast, classroom activities, that sort of thing. I know it's short notice, but I wondered if you'd be interested in attending with him." The invitation represented a notable shift from our established pattern. Previously, Michael had included me in Aiden's activities only when he needed practical assistance. Volunteering at a school carnival, supervising children during parents' night out, providing backup childcare during work emergencies. This invitation seemed to have no utilitarian purpose beyond facilitating a relationship between grandmother and grandson. "I'd love to attend," I replied warmly. "What time does it begin?" 8:30, he said. "I could pick you up at 8 if that works for you." "That would be perfect." Our meals arrived, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Aiden's latest developmental milestones, the renovation details he hadn't noticed during the housewarming, a challenging case he was preparing for trial. The exchange felt notably different from our previous interactions, more balanced, less performative, genuinely engaging rather than obligatory. As we finished dessert, Michael hesitated again before adding, "There's one other thing. Vanessa and I have been discussing Thanksgiving plans. We typically go to her parents' house in Connecticut. But this year, with your recovery and everything, we thought perhaps we should stay local." I recognized the implicit invitation but wanted to ensure clarity. "Are you suggesting we share Thanksgiving?" He nodded. "If you're open to it, we could host at our place, or come to yours if that's easier with your dietary considerations after the surgery." The offer to accommodate my health needs, rather than expecting me to adapt to their preferences regardless of my condition, represented another small but significant evolution in our dynamic. "I'd enjoy that very much," I said sincerely. "And my home could easily accommodate us. The new dining area was designed for entertaining." "Great," he smiled, seeming genuinely pleased. "We'll plan on that then." As we parted outside the restaurant, Michael surprised me with a brief but genuine hug. "I'm trying," he said quietly. "I know things haven't been ideal between us, but I'm working on it." "I appreciate that," I replied, "and I'm committed to building something healthier as well." Driving home, I reflected on the multiple expansions occurring simultaneously in my life: professional opportunities reactivating my educator identity, social connections developing through shared interests and activities, and now the potential reshaping of my most challenging family relationship. While I harbored no illusions about instantaneous transformation with Michael, I recognized the significance of even small movements toward more authentic connection. That evening, I received an email from Eliza Ramirez with a formal outline for the textbook project we had discussed earlier that day. The comprehensive proposal included chapter structures, potential publishers, timeline considerations, and royalty implications. The professionalism and seriousness of the document underscored that this was no casual collaboration, but a significant professional opportunity with potential impact far beyond my previous sphere of influence. As I reviewed the material, my phone chimed with a text message from Sophia. "James and I are picking up tickets for the Symphony's holiday concert next month. Group from the center getting seats together. Interested in joining?" I texted back immediately, "Absolutely. Count me in." Setting my phone aside, I returned to the textbook proposal, making notes about potential modifications and additions based on my classroom experience. The evening stretched before me, filled with purposeful activity and genuine anticipation for multiple aspects of my unfolding life. A stark contrast to the empty hours I had often experienced after retirement, when my primary identity as Michael's supportive mother had diminished in practical significance while no other defining purpose had emerged to replace it. My calendar for the coming weeks reflected this transformation visually. Previously sparse pages now filled with meaningful commitments representing diverse aspects of my rediscovered identity. The mathematics committee meeting, lunch with Elaine, to discuss the museum docent application, grandparents' day with Aiden, the community foundation interview, dinner with Robert and Diana, and Dr. Chen's advanced cardiac wellness seminar. Each entry represented not obligation, but opportunity. Chance to contribute, connect, learn, and grow in ways I had previously considered beyond my scope or season of life. As I prepared for bed, I found myself contemplating the irony that had shaped my recent journey. My son had called me a burden after my surgery, unaware of my hidden financial fortune. Yet the true wealth I had discovered in the aftermath of that painful moment wasn't measured in investment returns or property values, substantial though they were. It was the recognition of my intrinsic worth beyond utility to others, the courage to live from that recognition, and the joy that naturally flowed from authentic engagement with life on my own terms. The financial resources had provided practical options and security, certainly, but the genuine transformation had emerged from the internal recalibration of values and perspectives, the willingness to claim authentic space in my own existence, and the courage to engage with life from a position of self-respect rather than self-abnegation. Looking back at the woman I had been just months earlier, defining myself primarily through service to others while neglecting my own development and fulfillment, I felt compassion rather than judgment. That limited self-definition hadn't reflected character deficiency, but rather the unconscious absorption of cultural messages about a woman's proper priorities and appropriate ambitions, particularly in my generation. Looking forward, I felt neither anxious anticipation nor careful resignation, but rather genuine curiosity about what might unfold as I continued this journey of authentic engagement with life's possibilities. The path ahead wasn't perfectly clear or predictable. It contained uncertainties, potential disappointments, and inevitable challenges alongside its opportunities and pleasures. But it was unmistakably mine to navigate according to my own values and discernment, rather than external expectations or habitual patterns. As I drifted toward sleep, a simple truth crystallized in my consciousness. The most profound act of love, for ourselves and ultimately for others, isn't limitless self-sacrifice, but rather wholehearted engagement with our unique capacity for contribution and joy. By reclaiming this birthright I had long ago surrendered, I was potentially offering my son and grandson a more valuable inheritance than financial assets or practical support. The living example of authentic self-respect and purposeful engagement with life's possibilities at every age. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.